All characters and events described in this story are fictitious. Any similarities with real people or events are purely coincidental. Write in the comments what city you are from. Perhaps you also had similar stories. It would be very interesting to know what happened in your corner of the world. If you liked it, don't forget to like, share your thoughts or stories in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. There are even more exciting and unexpected stories to come. Tom Harper smiled wearily as his plane touched down gently on the local airport's runway, tires crunching on the asphalt and shuddering slightly in the slight headwind. He spent 3 long days on a business trip, days filled with negotiations, jet lag, and endless cups of office coffee. Now he was finally returning home to where his real life began, to a cozy house with walls painted a warm cream color and a creaky wooden porch, which Rachel looked after. Tom looked tired but happy. Tall, with slightly tousled brown hair and sloppy stubble, he was dressed in a dark gray jacket, slightly wrinkled after the flight, and a simple white shirt, the top button of which he undid while still in the air, dreaming of freedom and peace. His eyes, gray-green, attentive, with wrinkles at the corners, shone with anticipation. He walked down the airport corridor with a small leather bag on his shoulder, feeling his heart beating a little faster than usual. In the baggage claim, among the people scrambling to grab suitcases from the revolving belts, Tom paused for a moment, took a small box tied with a thin ribbon from his inside jacket pocket. It was an amber pendant he had hastily selected for Rachel in the gift shop at the gate. In a bag nearby was a book for Josh, a colorful story about a talking train that he hoped would become his bedtime favorite. He hadn't warned Rachel about his return. He wanted to surprise her. Imagining her turning away from the stove and stopping in surprise in the kitchen doorway, Tom couldn't help but smile wider. In his mind's eye, the evening was perfect. The aroma of home-cooked food, Josh's laughter, a quiet conversation under the flickering lamp in the living room. All this seemed like a real reward for the tiring workdays. Outside the taxi window, the lights of the evening city flashed neon signs, lanterns, the light of windows in which other people's lives lived. The car swayed gently on turns, and rare drops of rain flowed down the glass. Tom looked at his watch. It was about 9 in the evening. Rachel usually puts Josh to bed at this time, reading him a bedtime story. He tenderly imagined how his son, yawning, wrapped himself in a blanket, hugging his favorite soft toy, a stuffed dinosaur, and listening to his mother's voice, soothing and calm. In his room, decorated with a starry ceiling and posters of space rockets, among shelves filled with Legos, Josh is probably nodding off, fighting sleep. A warmth spread through Tom's chest. He missed his family. In the last few months, there had been so much work that the days had become a series of trips, meetings, and hotel rooms. The new project was important and promising, but the price for success was too high. He was away from home too often. But today, Tom thought, everything would be different. He would arrive early, quietly enter, undress in the hallway, and suddenly Rachel's surprised eyes, her embrace, a soft smile. The peace and quiet of home, so familiar and unattainable lately. He leaned back in his seat and, looking into the twilight of the streets, involuntarily remembered the day when they found out that they would become parents. It was Sunday, early morning. Rachel was standing in the kitchen in his old t-shirt, her hair tangled, her eyes full of confused happiness. She held the test in her hands, and when she told him, Tom didn't believe it at first, but then he laughed and hugged her tightly. They sat on the floor in an embrace for a long time, surrounded by cups of cold tea, discussing names, children's toys, and the color of the walls in the children's room. Then everything seemed so far away, almost fabulous. And now this has become his life, his meaning. Home, he thought, that's them. And the taxi, turning onto a familiar street, drove into the suburbs, where a cozy light was already flickering in the windows. The taxi stopped at a low cottage with a well-kept front garden. There was soft light in the windows. Tom paid the driver, took his travel bag, and breathed in the cool evening air. The end of September brought with it the first yellow leaves on the lawns and a slight coolness in the evenings. The house looked welcoming. During his absence, Rachel clearly maintained perfect order, It was not for nothing that the neighbors loved to praise her for her hard work and housekeeping. Tom quietly walked up the steps of the porch, trying not to crack the boards. He was going to sneak in and take Rachel by surprise. Maybe she hadn't put Josh to bed yet, and then her son would happily throw himself on his neck. The door was unlocked. Rachel was probably expecting him tomorrow and didn't think anyone would come today. Tom turned the handle and slipped inside. The hallway smelled of vanilla and freshly baked pie. His heart skipped a beat. Rachel had apparently decided to bake something delicious. Perhaps she wanted to please Josh or just have a cozy evening. He put the bag on the floor and called quietly, "Rachel, I'm home." There was no answer. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. Tom frowned, although he still had a smile on his face. His wife was probably upstairs, putting Josh to bed or taking a shower before bed. He decided to surprise her by sneaking up and hugging her, catching her unawares. Climbing the stairs to the second floor, Tom noticed an unfamiliar leather jacket on a hanger in the hallway. He slowed down. The jacket clearly did not belong to either him or Rachel. The style was too youthful, and the size was larger than what Tom wore. Maybe someone came in? A thought flashed. Could the neighbor have stopped by to return a borrowed drill, or could Rachel's brother have arrived unannounced? But Rachel has no brothers. Tom felt the first anxious tingling somewhere in his stomach. He walked silently to the bedroom door. The door was not completely closed, and the dim light of a night lamp poured out. Tom froze when he heard a quiet laugh. Rachel was laughing, softly and gently, the way she used to laugh on romantic dates many years ago. But her laughter was interspersed with a low male voice. The blood drained from Tom's face. The second voice did not belong to 10-year-old Josh, and certainly not to someone on the TV. There were clearly two adults in the bedroom. On weak legs, Tom pushed the door. The picture that appeared to him in the soft yellow light of the lamp seemed to burn his eyes. Rachel lay on the marital bed, half covered with a blanket, and a man's arm covered her bare shoulders. Next to her, propped up on his elbow, was an unfamiliar young man, muscular, fit, with a gaze frozen in surprise. Rachel noticed Tom too. Her face lost color in an instant, her eyes widened in horror. For several seconds, no one moved. A suffocating silence hung in the room. Only Tom's heart beat loudly once, twice, 3 times. It seemed that this sound would fill the entire space. "What?" Tom began hoarsely, but the word got stuck in his throat. Rachel sat up in bed, pulling the covers up to her chest. The stranger's gaze darted from her to Tom, and he began frantically searching the floor for something, probably clothes. "Tom," Rachel breathed, her voice shaking. It's not what you think." Her words sounded pathetic and meaningless. Tom continued to stand in the doorway, his hands squeezing the door frame until his knuckles turned white. Something terrible rose in his chest, a mixture of pain, rage, and a sickening premonition of the end of everything he loved. "How could you?" He finally whispered, barely audibly, barely moving his numb tongue. The man, meanwhile, pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, hastily getting out of bed. He froze, seeing Tom blocking the exit. The bedroom was small, a step forward, and Tom would have been at arm's length from the stranger who was in his house, in his bedroom, next to his wife. Tom glanced quickly at Rachel. She was crying. Large tears flowed down her cheeks. She frantically shook her head, whispering something like, "I'm sorry." At that moment, something in Tom finally snapped. He lunged forward, grabbed Rachel's lover by the collar of his shirt, and threw him hard against the wall. The man crashed into a bookcase against the wall, sending books and boxes crashing down the shelves. "Get out of my house," Tom shouted in a voice he didn't recognize. Blood was pounding in my temples. "Immediately, while you're still alive. Dude, calm down." The stranger muttered, raising his hands. "I'm leaving, okay, just let me go." But Tom had already let go, his rage spilling out in the first jerk. Now he stood, breathing heavily, in the middle of the bedroom, listening to the stranger quickly grab his jacket in the hallway and slam the front door, flying out into the night. There was a ringing silence. Only now did Tom notice that his hands were shaking. He looked up at Rachel. She was still wrapped in a rumpled blanket, sitting on the bed. Her shoulders were shaking, either from the cold or from sobbing. Tom clenched his fists, trying to pull himself together. Anger was seething in him, his pulse was pounding in his temples, but on top of this rage an icy, devastating wave of despair was already rolling in. He stood in the bedroom doorway, as if chained, unable to take a single step. He couldn't believe his eyes. Rachel, his Rachel, the woman he had lived with for 12 years, the mother of his son, was sitting on the edge of the bed like a schoolgirl caught in a lie. Her shoulders were slumped, her hands clutching the edge of the bedspread, her gaze darting around, avoiding his. There was something alien about the face he knew down to the last detail. The slight flush on her cheeks, usually so sweet, now seemed an uneasy stain of guilt. Her hair, hastily pulled back, still bore traces of someone else's fingers. She was wearing his old house shirt, too big and almost touching in this ridiculous context, but it was the shirt that made everything even more painful, a reminder of a past intimacy, of a trust that was no longer alive. In their bed, their shared, warm, memory-filled bed, there was still the imprint of someone else's body, a slight indentation in the pillow, a rumpled sheet, a foreign scent that Tom had caught as soon as he entered. The room that had been a symbol of comfort and love only yesterday now seemed like a scene of betrayal. He looked at her, and scenes from their life arose before his eyes. How she held Josh in her arms in the maternity hospital, how she laughed, leaning towards him at breakfast, how she hugged him tightly when he went on business trips. All these images now began to crumble like glass broken by an invisible blow. "How could you?" Tom's voice shook, despite his attempt to sound stern. "We're a family, Josh." At the sound of her son's name, Rachel's face twisted in pain. She sobbed. "Joshua is at Taylor's for a sleepover. You were away, and he really wanted to see his friend." She started babbling, but fell silent under her husband's heavy gaze. She specifically sent her son to a school friend so that Tom couldn't finish this thought. Images flashed in his head, an empty house, Rachel calling this guy, inviting him, the two of them laughing in Tom's absence. This picture made him feel sick. "So you planned it all," he muttered. "Decided to take advantage of the fact that I left?" "No, not like that." Rachel stood up from the bed, tucking the blanket around her body. She took a hesitant step towards him. "Listen, please. It was a mistake. Stupidity. I didn't think. I missed you. You were constantly at work, on the road. I made a terrible mistake." She extended her free hand, as if hoping to touch him, to calm him, but Tom recoiled as if from fire. "Don't touch me," he said sharply. His eyes were burning. "Don't even dare come closer." Rachel sobbed again and covered her face with her hand. "I'm sorry. Please, Tom, listen to me." She begged through tears. "I love you. It didn't mean anything." Tom chuckled bitterly at the hackneyed excuse. "It didn't mean anything. Almost every unfaithful wife says that to the husband she betrayed." There was a ringing in his ears. Adrenaline was boiling in his blood. "Did it mean anything?" he echoed, lowering his voice to a dangerous calm. "You brought a strange man into our house, to our bed. I risked that my son might understand something, and this is nothing for you." "I thought of everything," Rachel said quickly, lowering her hand. Black streaks of mascara ran down her cheeks. "Josh was at a friend's. He shouldn't have seen anything. I didn't want to break up the family. This is a mistake." Listening to her confused excuses, Tom suddenly felt disgust. This woman in front of him now was a stranger, unpleasant, although he had thought of her with love that morning. He did not recognize his wife. "Shut up," he said quietly. "Just shut up." Rachel took a deep breath and obediently bit her lip, but her eyes looked at him pleadingly, looking for hope. I'll leave tomorrow if you want," she whispered. "Just please don't do anything yet. Don't tell Josh." Tom's heart sank painfully at the thought of his son. He imagined Josh's smiling face and felt acute shame. He was screaming, smashing the house, and somewhere nearby their boy. Fortunately, Josh was really not at home. Tom stepped back towards the bedroom door. He had to leave immediately, otherwise he couldn't vouch for himself. Tomorrow, Tom's voice was hoarse. You weren't here tomorrow. When Josh gets back, he shouldn't. He hesitated, trying to find the words. He didn't want his son to see his mother in that light. But he himself didn't know how to live his life now. Tom. Rachel began, still standing in the center of the room, looking lost. He raised his hand to stop her. I'm filing for divorce, he said slowly, each word cutting like a knife into his throat. Tomorrow. Rachel froze as if he had hit her. Horror burned in his wide-open eyes. No, don't, please. She shook her head. Give me a chance. But Tom wasn't listening anymore. He turned and ran out of the bedroom, stomping loudly down the stairs. Rachel followed, forgetting about her nakedness, but when she realized it, she only stood in the bedroom doorway, wrapping herself in a sheet. Volume came from behind him when he picked up his travel bag, abandoned in the hallway. He didn't turn around. With trembling hands, he felt for the door handle. My heart was pounding, the thought was beating in my head. Why? Why did she do that? Outside the door, Rachel was sobbing, repeating his name, but Tom crossed the threshold. The night air burned my lungs with cold, which contained the tart smell of fallen leaves, wet earth, and distant fires, the autumn breath of a city immersed in twilight. Tom came down from the porch, as if through viscous, slow-motion time. He did not remember how he left the house. His legs themselves carried him away from the walls saturated with betrayal. There was a resounding fog in my head. Not a single thought lasted longer than a second. He walked mechanically to his car, parked at the curb, and, not feeling the cold, opened the door and sank into the driver's seat. The metal was icy. The leather of the steering wheel was hard and taut, like a reflection of his own nerves. He sat in the darkness, staring out the windshield, seeing nothing but the distorted glare of the headlights and his own fragments of memory. Something trembled painfully in my chest. A picture appeared before my eyes. A warm morning, early spring. Rachel walks out onto the porch with a cup of coffee, barefoot and wearing his sweater. The sun touches her hair and she laughs, calling him inside. Josh has just painted family on the kitchen wall, and it's all gouache. He then thought that he was happy. Absolutely. Without a trace. He blinked, coming back to reality, but immediately a new wave of memories came flooding back. A summer day, Rachel driving, the wind blowing through her hair, Josh in the back seat waving his wand like a lightsaber. They were driving to the lake. Rachel turned to him and whispered, "Promise me we'll always be together." And he promised. Seriously, sincerely, as if he were making a vow for life. Now these memories crunched inside, like glass under the soles of my feet. Tom's hands lay limply on the steering wheel, squeezing it until the leather creaked. He felt anger and pain like icy streams, filling every cell of his body. In the house, behind the curtains, the light continued to burn. There inside, his old life remained collapsed in an instant, like a house of cards under someone else's fingers. Finally, waking up from his thoughts, Tom turned on the ignition with a trembling hand. His eyes burned, either from the tears that had welled up, or from fatigue, or from the feeling that his heart had been ripped out and only emptiness was left. He took a deep breath, the air cut his throat, and almost choked from a sob that still did not burst out. This can't be true. This can't be true, he repeated to himself. Everything was fine this morning. He called Rachel from the airport and left a voicemail. "I'll be there soon. Don't be bored without me." He could almost hear her smile, imagining her putting the phone on the table and returning to her evening chores. How could all of this be a lie? No, now nothing can be returned. Rachel cheated on him. She betrayed not only him, but also Josh, the reality they had been building for years. Everything that he considered unshakable cracked like ice under his feet. As the engine started, Tom took one last look at the house. A shadow glided through the thin curtains in the second-story window. Rachel. She was watching him. Maybe she hoped he would come back. That he would come back up, open the door, say, "We'll fix this." But Tom already knew that was impossible. He turned away, clenched his teeth, and pressed the gas pedal. The car jerked forward, cutting through the night emptiness, carrying Tom away from the house, where not only his perfect evening had crashed, but his entire previous life. With every mile, he felt how this world was retreating, becoming distant, as if alien. 3 weeks have passed. Autumn came into its own. Crimson leaves swirled along the sidewalks. The morning air became colder. But there was an icy silence in the Harper house. Tom and Rachel lived separately. After that night, Rachel left the family home, moving in with a friend, and Tom stayed with Josh. They hardly spoke, only short messages on the phone about school or their son's clubs, dry and official. Joshua seemed to sense that something bad had happened between his parents. He asked questions: why mom doesn't spend the night at home, why dad is so sad. Tom, creaking his heart, told his son that his mother had gone to help a sick aunt in another state, or something like that. Rachel also reassured the boy on the phone, promising that everything would get better soon. But in reality, nothing was getting better. Tom had already filed for divorce, and Rachel knew it. Their marriage was crumbling, trust was destroyed. During the weeks that Rachel stayed with her friend, she was almost beside herself. At night, she tossed and turned on the couch in the living room of a stranger's house, endlessly replaying scenes from the past in her head. The first time she met Tom at a frat party, when he had been so sweetly embarrassed when he asked for her phone number. Their wedding, a happy bride in a white dress, the groom looking at her lovingly at the altar, her holding her newborn Joshua in her arms, and Tom laughing with joy next to her. All these memories burned her soul. How could she exchange long-term, sincere love for a fleeting infatuation? Rachel's friend Sarah, who was staying with her, tried to support her, although she herself was barely hiding her disappointment. Late one evening, finding Rachel sitting in the kitchen in the dark, Sarah poured them both a cup of tea and sat down next to her. "You knew how this could end," she said softly, stirring her cold tea with a spoon. "Why did you even get involved with this coach? Tom is a great husband." He was. Rachel lowered her bloodshot eyes. She had cried so much over the past week that there were no more tears left, only emptiness. "I can't explain to you," she whispered. "It should never have gone this far. I felt bad, Sar. It seemed to me that Tom was moving away from me." Sarah nodded understandingly. "Is Adam the same fitness trainer you mentioned last summer? You seem to have become friends through sports back then." Rachel cringed in shame. "Yes, I met him at the gym. At first, we were just talking after training. Then he suggested having coffee sometime. I thought it was nothing special, just friendly communication. I lacked attention. Tom was busy all the time. Adam was so attentive, cheerful, interested in me, complimented me. And I felt attractive again, needed. Like a fool, I believed that I had the right to a moment of happiness." Her voice trembled. "Everything went too far, and I did not stop." Sarah shook her head. "And so you decided to find solace elsewhere. Rachel, dear, many people go through this. But to rush into such an adventure right away." Rachel pressed her palms to her face in despair. I know everything. There is no excuse for me. I behaved disgustingly, disgustingly." Her shoulders shook with sobs. Sarah patted her sympathetically on the back. "Everyone makes mistakes," her friend said quietly. "But now, what are you going to do?" Rachel took a shuddering breath and raised her tear-streaked face. Determination flashed in his eyes. "I'll fix it. If Tom wants to talk to me at all, I'll beg, I'll get on my knees, I'll ask for forgiveness. I've already broken up with Adam, I swear, not another word. It was a terrible mistake. I have to get my family back." Sarah looked at her sadly. "And if he doesn't forgive?" Rachel answered in a barely audible voice. "Then I'll understand him too. I can't forgive myself either. But, for Josh's sake, for our son's sake, maybe he'll give me a chance." The friend sighed, but did not argue. She simply hugged Rachel, letting her cry on her shoulder. Rachel swore to herself once again that she would do everything possible to regain her husband's trust. She could not have imagined then, not even in her worst nightmares, what a terrible price the chance to try would come at. Meanwhile, Tom whiled away his evenings at home with Josh, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy for his son. Every day he cooked dinner, helped with homework, read a bedtime story instead of Rachel. Lying to his son was painful, but Tom could not reveal the bitter truth to a 10-year-old boy. As he settled Josh into bed, he repeated the story about his mother's sick relative whom she had gone to visit. Josh frowned with displeasure. A couple of times he missed his mom and didn't understand why she didn't call at night like before. Tom had a hard time finding words of consolation. He promised that Mom would be back soon, that she missed her too. Sometimes after such conversations, Josh fell asleep sad, hugging his stuffed astronaut. Tom sat next to him until his son's breathing became even and then went out, closing the door. In the silence of the empty house, a wave of despair rolled over Tom. One night he walked into a dark bedroom, the same one where the betrayal happened. In the faint light of the street lamp, the rumpled sheets on the marital bed were visible. Tom suddenly felt such a surge of anger that he tore off the coverlet along with the sheets and crumpled them, throwing them into the corner. My heart was beating wildly. On the bedside table there was a photograph of him and Rachel on their wedding day, beaming happy. Tom grabbed the frame. Two serene people looked at him from the photograph, who then could not even imagine how their marriage would turn out years later. A lump came to my throat. Tom squeezed the frame so that the glass cracked in his hands, cutting his skin. Having come to his senses, he dropped the photograph and sank to the floor, pressing his bloody palm to his chest. That night, he finally cried out everything that was burning him from the inside silently into his fist, so as not to wake up his son. After that, Tom felt empty. All that was left was pain, an icy shell that gripped his heart. He no longer believed that he would ever be able to forgive Rachel, and it was at this moment that fate struck another blow. In mid-October, in the middle of the school day, Tom's cell phone vibrated on his desk. The call came from Josh's elementary school. Tom's heart skipped a beat. Teachers don't just call in the middle of the day. "Mr. Harper," the teacher's voice was worried. "Sorry to bother you, but there's something wrong with Joshua. He complained of weakness and dizziness, and then he passed out in class. The nurse is checking him out right now." Tom's eyes started to swim. I'm already on my way," was all he could squeeze out. Tom hung up and jumped up, ignoring the worried looks from his colleagues. He didn't even grab his jacket, running out into the cool autumn day in his shirt sleeves. The school was a few blocks from his office, and 10 minutes later, after breaking a few traffic laws, Tom drove into the school parking lot. There was a crowd of kids and one of the teachers outside the nurse's office. Tom pushed his way in and saw Josh lying on the couch, pale as paper. A hot water bottle was applied to his small hand, and the school nurse was bustling about, taking his blood pressure. "Daddy," Josh called softly when he saw Tom. The boy's lips were whitish, and there were shadows under his eyes. Tom rushed to his son, knelt down next to him, and squeezed his cold hand. "I'm here, son," he said, trying to smile, although his heart was constricted with horror. "Everything will be fine now." "My head is spinning," Joshua whispered. The nurse turned to Tom. "Mr. Harper, I called an ambulance. Your boy has very low blood pressure and has fainted twice in the last half hour. He needs to go to the hospital for an examination." "To the hospital?" "Yes, of course," Tom said, feeling his mouth go dry. He stroked his son's forehead, feeling how hot he was. "Hold on, baby. The doctors will arrive soon." Only one thought was pounding in his head. If only Josh were alive. Soon, an ambulance siren blared outside the schoolyard. Two paramedics quickly and efficiently loaded Josh onto a stretcher. The boy barely responded, squeezing Tom's fingers once and whispering, "Don't go." Tom promised to go with him. Everything happened so quickly that only after climbing into the ambulance did Tom remember about Rachel. She should know. With trembling hands, he took out his phone and dialed her number. Rachel rushed to the hospital almost simultaneously with the ambulance. Out of breath after running through the hallways, she saw Tom at the door of the emergency room. He stood with his back against the wall, his face whiter than hospital tiles. Noticing Rachel, he closed his eyes for a moment, and so many feelings flashed through them at once: anger, resentment, and most of all, fear. "Where's Josh? What's wrong with him?" Rachel blurted out as a greeting. "Inside," Tom answered hoarsely, nodding toward the door. "Doctors are checking him out. He passed out at school. They're taking tests." Rachel moaned softly and staggered, leaning against the wall next to Tom. He automatically raised his hand to support her elbow, but immediately pulled it back, as if he had come to his senses. They stood silently for several seconds, not looking at each other, catching every sound outside the door. Finally, the door opened abruptly and a young doctor in a blue uniform came out. "Joshua Harper's parents?" he asked, looking at Tom and Rachel. "Yes, They rushed to him almost simultaneously. "Your son is conscious, his condition is stabilized," the doctor said wearily. "We took blood tests and gave him enrollment 4. Preliminary results show very low hemoglobin and white blood cell levels. A more detailed examination needs to be carried out. Transfer to a children's hospital for further evaluation may be necessary." "What does this mean?" Tom's voice broke. "Low hemoglobin. Why did he faint? Is it something serious?" The doctor exchanged a glance with Rachel, then looked back at Tom. "It's too early to say for sure," he said carefully, "but blood levels like these could indicate a serious illness. We suspect leukemia, but confirmation will take some time." "Leukemia," Rachel repeated quietly, as if the word was in a foreign language. The doctor nodded sympathetically. "I understand, this is a shock. The main thing now is to transfer the boy to a specialized hospital. We have an affiliation with St. Christopher's Children's Medical Center. There, he will be able to be examined by hematologists, oncologists, and, if necessary, begin treatment. The ambulance is ready. We will transport him now." "Can we visit him?" Tom asked in a hoarse voice. "Not yet," the doctor gently refused. "They give him medicine and prepare him for transportation. Please submit these documents for translation." He handed Tom a folder with papers. Tom took it in confusion, noticing that his hands were shaking and his eyes were blurry. Rachel gathered her strength and carefully took the folder from his hands. "I'll fill it out," she said quietly. "Do you mind?" Tom just nodded, watching the doctor disappear back through the door. "Leukemia." This word pulsated in my consciousness, finding no response, as if it referred to someone else's life, someone else's misfortune. Not with our Josh, not with their cheerful, active boy, who just a week ago ran faster than everyone else in physical education. Not with him. He sat down on a plastic chair along the wall, covering his face with his hands. It was impossible to believe that all this was happening in reality. Just in the morning, he was rushing to work, thinking about divorce. And now the whole world has narrowed to one point: his son's life is under threat. Rachel sat down carefully next to him. She finished the papers and handed them to the nurse, then sat silently, twisting the strap of her bag between her fingers. Tom could feel her presence, the familiar scent of her perfume wafting faintly through the tense air of the hallway. Inside, he was seething with contradictions. An hour ago, he could barely look at Rachel without anger, but now he was grateful that she was here. After all, she loves Josh just as much as he does. He almost hated himself for the thought, but the relief of not being alone was greater. Half an hour later, they were allowed to visit Josh for a minute, a short visit before the boy was transferred to another department for more careful observation. The long, deserted corridor of the hospital, lined with gray tiles, echoed their steps. Tom and Rachel walked side by side without saying a word. Silence hung between them heavy, taut like a string. But now is not the time for reproaches and conversations. Now it's just Josh. The door creaked, and they were greeted by the dim light of the room, the smell of antiseptic, and the measured beeping of the monitor. Josh lay on the hospital bed, tiny, almost lost in the folds of the blanket. His skin was pale, with a bluish tint under his eyes. Thin fingers lay limply on the sheet, and an Roman 4 drip was drawn from his hand, to which he seemed to have become accustomed. When he saw his parents, together in the doorway, his eyes lit up with a weak but genuine joy. He tried to smile, his lips trembled. This smile, stubborn, as if torn from the last of his strength, seemed to pierce Tom through and through. He shouldn't have seen us like this, Tom thought, feeling something inside him break. When he looked at his son, he saw more than just a child. He saw their shared past, everything that now seemed so fragile. I had no right to leave him. Not that night, not in my mind. No matter what happened between Rachel and me, Josh is all we have. He is the only truly pure piece of our love. Rachel came first, sitting next to him and carefully taking her son's hand, her fingers trembling. In her gaze there is fear, guilt, fatigue, and immeasurable love, intertwined in one lump. She didn't cry, the tears had long since dried up. Only emptiness and prayer remained inside. My little one, I'm sorry it's like this. She thought, you don't deserve a single crack in the world we built for you. We failed you. I failed you. But please, just be better. I can handle the rest. Tom stood at the head of the bed and ran his hand through his son's hair. Josh, despite his weakness, squeezed his fingers, and this weak, almost childish gesture made Tom look away so as not to reveal how his throat was constricted by a spasm. We're here, baby, he whispered hoarsely. We're with you. The room seemed to be filled with a different kind of silence, not hospital, but alive, filled with the breath of three people, still connected by something much stronger than pain. The minutes passed, and everything else receded. Pain, betrayal, resentment, only this tiny, but real moment remained. A moment in which forgiveness may have begun. Mom, Dad, he muttered in a weak voice. Tom and Rachel leaned over their son from either side, each taking his hand. We're here, honey, Rachel whispered, stroking his palm. There were tears in her eyes, but she held on. You, don't swear. The boy breathed out, looking first at one, then at the other. Tom felt a lump in his throat. Even now, exhausted and sick, Josh was worried about them. It's okay, son, we're not arguing, Tom said quietly, trying to sound confident. He leaned over and touched his lips to the boy's hot forehead. We're here for you, and we'll be here for as long as it takes. Rachel nodded, smiling through her tears. Of course, baby. Daddy and I aren't going anywhere. We're both with you. Josh closed his eyes in relief. Tom and Rachel exchanged a quick glance across their son's bed. There was a fragile truce in that look, sealed by fear for the child. That evening, Joshua was transported to Children's Medical Center. He was immediately placed in a specialized unit in a room with 2 beds, one left for one of the parents. Tom and Rachel followed their son on a gurney down long corridors, shaking with helplessness. They were briefly introduced to Dr. Richards, an elderly pediatric oncologist who began to explain the next steps. Tom caught only fragments of phrases. Suspected acute leukemia, need to confirm with bone marrow tests, start chemotherapy ASAP. The hours merged into one endless wait. When Josh finally fell asleep after the injections and procedures, Tom was literally shaking from nervous fatigue. Rachel sat next to her son's bed, holding his little hand, and cried silently. Tom went to the window of the room. Behind the glass, the early twilight was gathering. In the parking lot below, the lights of the cars were flashing. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass, feeling hot tears running down his cheeks. Until recently, he hoped that the doctors were wrong. But by evening, the diagnosis was confirmed. Josh had acute lymphoblastic leukemia, blood cancer. Sobs were heard behind them. Tom turned around. Rachel buried her face in the sheet next to her son's hand, her shoulders shaking with sobs. There was hopelessness in every quiet sob. For the first time in a long time, Tom did not feel angry at the sight of his wife. Instead, it was as if someone's hand was squeezing my heart. He could not bear her grief because it was his grief too. Tom walked up quietly and put his hand on her shoulder. Rachel raised her tear-stained face. Tom, our boy, she whispered brokenly. He was speechless. He knelt down beside her and wrapped his arms around her tentatively. Rachel froze for a moment, then clung to him, sobbing loudly. Tom tightened his grip on her shaking shoulders. They sat there, next to their son's bed, crying together, parents who had lost their footing. After a while, Rachel calmed down a little. Realizing that she was hugging her husband, she carefully pulled away, wiping her tears with her palm. "Sorry," she muttered, looking away. Tom nodded silently and stood up. The pain did not go away, but the tears slightly loosened the iron hoop that was squeezing my chest. He looked at Josh, who was sleeping peacefully. Now his son's face was calm, like a baby's, and it was hard to believe that the disease was raging inside him. Late at night, while Josh was fast asleep under the influence of medication, Tom went out into the hallway to drink water. When he returned, he found Rachel in the corner of the room, quietly talking on the phone. At the sound of the door opening, she flinched and quickly ended the conversation. "No, don't come. You can't help. Goodbye." She turned off the phone and closed her eyes for a second, gathering her courage. Tom watched her sullenly. "Was it him?" he asked quietly from the darkness. Rachel turned and met his gaze, her expression telling her she knew who he was talking about. "Yes," she answered just as quietly. "I told Adam that it was over between us. Forever." Tom said nothing, just turned back to his son's bed. He himself didn't know what he felt. Relief, perhaps. But all feelings were dulled by the main fear for the life of the child. A minute later, Rachel timidly came closer. "Tom," she began, but he didn't let her finish. "Later," was all he managed to say, not looking at her. "Right now, let's just take care of Josh." Rachel nodded and said nothing more. This project is done with soul and desire to grow. Subscribe if you want to walk this path with us. We greatly value feedback, especially feedback that helps us grow and inspires rather than criticizes. Thank you for your trust. That night, neither Tom nor Rachel slept a wink. Tom spent several hours staring at his smartphone, reading everything he could find about childhood leukemia, medical articles, advice from parents on forums, stories of miraculous recoveries. The abundance of numbers and complex terms made him feel uneasy, but he clung to every story with a happy ending, convincing himself that Josh could handle it too. Rachel, retreating to the corner of the room, quietly went through the phone to one of the support groups for parents of sick children on Facebook. She wrote a short message sharing her troubles and hopes, and almost immediately received dozens of responses, strangers wishing her strength, talking about their similar experiences, praying for her son. Reading these words, Rachel cried and mentally thanked everyone. For the first time in all this time, she felt that she and Tom were not alone. A whole community of people who had gone through similar things was ready to support them and share their fears. The next morning, a long course of treatment began. Josh was put under general anesthesia and underwent a bone marrow puncture, confirming the diagnosis once and for all. Then chemotherapy began. Roman 4 drips with cytostatic drugs, endless blood tests, injections. Josh bravely endured all the procedures, although sometimes he cried quietly from pain or fear. Tom and Rachel took turns comforting him, reading books aloud, playing battleship and chess on the bedside table, trying to distract him as best they could. One night, Josh became particularly ill. His temperature rose, and he threw up from the effects of chemotherapy. Rachel, shaking, held the basin and supported her son by the shoulders while the boy vomited, whispering tenderly, "It will be okay, darling, I'm here." Tom ran out into the hallway for a nurse. After receiving anti-nausea drugs, Josh gradually calmed down, but he slept restlessly, groaning from time to time. Tom and Rachel did not leave. They wiped Josh with a cool towel, measured his temperature every half hour, and each prayed silently for this night to pass quickly. Rachel remembered how 10 years ago she held her newborn boy in her arms and promised herself to protect him from all harm. Now her little one was suffering, and all she could do was wipe his forehead and whisper words of encouragement. This helpless compassion tore her apart from the inside. Tom, looking at his son's exhausted face, thought once again that he would give everything in the world just to take his pain upon himself. It was a tense 2 weeks in the hospital ward. Tom was on leave for family reasons, and Rachel was by Josh's side. At night, they took turns sleeping on the narrow couch in the corner or dozing next to the bed, holding hands with Josh. They barely spoke to each other, only about the necessary things. But their actions complemented each other perfectly. If one went out for coffee, the other wiped his son's forehead with a wet towel. If Rachel went to call a friend and get clean clothes, Tom kept an eye on the Roman IV and called the nurse at the slightest deviation. They were both exhausted and scared to the core, but they were united by a common goal: to save Josh. After 2 weeks of intensive care, doctors gave him cautiously encouraging news. The disease had begun to recede, the first remission had set in. Tests showed improvement, and Josh was allowed to go home for a short time to gain strength before the next round of treatment. For the first time in a long time, Tom saw Rachel smile sincerely when she helped her sleepy son pack his things, and the doctor, looking at them, said, "Only for a few days, then we'll return to therapy, but now it's good for him to take a break." Josh was delighted. He believed that he would see his house and room, even if only for a short time. However, the main question had to be resolved: what to do at home. Tom stood at the window of the hospital room, looking at the dark courtyard where the last autumn leaves were spinning in the yellow light of the lantern. Feelings were raging inside him, but on the outside he was calm, almost scorched, like a field after a fire. Behind him, Rachel silently collected Josh's things: a stuffed toy, a toothbrush, pajamas with rockets on them. She stopped, holding a folded shirt in her hands, and quietly, almost without looking at him, said, "Can I come back to you?" She hesitated and swallowed. "Well, home, at least for the duration of Josh's treatment. He will be calmer. I'll sleep in the living room if necessary. I won't interfere." Her voice trembled, and Tom felt something squeezing in his chest that he had not given voice to: a pity, a shadow of his former affection, pain. He knew it wasn't easy for her to ask after everything that had happened. He didn't know what he felt for her now, other than fatigue and the need to be strong for his son. But she's right, Josh needs a home, and Mom is nearby. He turned and looked at her carefully. Rachel stood with her shoulders hunched, as if ready to accept any answer. Her eyes were red, her hands were fiddling with the edge of the bag. He hesitated for only a moment. "Of course," he said quietly, "it will be better for him." Rachel breathed a sigh of relief, but didn't look him in the eyes. She only nodded slightly and lowered her head. "Thank you," she whispered. Tom turned back to the window, but after a short pause he added, "Just don't pretend that nothing happened." "I'm not going to," she said quickly, and there was pain in her voice. "I know I messed everything up. I just want to be with Josh. Everything else doesn't matter right now." "No, it's important," he said. "Everything is important, just not right now. Then we'll figure it out." She nodded. "I'll be quiet. No talking if you don't want to. Only Josh, just for him." Tom nodded slightly. "For his sake," he repeated, "we both need to get our act together. Not for myself, for him." Their gazes crossed for a moment. There was fatigue, pain, and something almost imperceptible in them, a trace of their former life, not yet completely erased. A nurse appeared in the corridor behind the glass, holding a folder in her hands. It was time to transfer Josh, and at that moment they both understood their personal scores were put aside. Now only their son. They decided that for Josh's sake, they would try to live as before, under the same roof. At least while the treatment lasted. Tom called his lawyer and asked to suspend the divorce proceedings, explaining that his son was seriously ill. They officially formalized adjournment of the case by mutual consent. Thus, the Harper family was reunited, albeit temporarily and fragilely. There was a long road ahead of the fight against the disease, and at this turning point they stayed together, trying not to think about the past. Everything is for Josh. The Harper home greeted them with peace and quiet. After the hospital walls, returning seemed like a fairy tale, at least for Josh. He happily wandered around the rooms, as if he had not been there for a long time, although only a month had passed. Back in the hospital, Rachel decorated the living room with balloons and a "Welcome Home" banner that her neighbors gave her. The neighbors generally supported the family as best they could. Mrs. Wilson from across the street baked cookies. The parents of Josh's classmates gave a whole box of homemade cards with words of support. Social networks did not remain on the sidelines either. In a local Facebook group, residents of the area wrote words of encouragement and offered help, and Rachel's post about Josh's return home collected dozens of good wishes and likes. Classmates sent a touching video message. Each student in turn said hello and wished Josh a speedy recovery. Such moments made the parents smile through their tears. The world is not without kind people. Josh, travel-weary but happy, sat down in his favorite spot on the couch. Perched next to him was his plush astronaut, a toy that accompanied the boy during all hospital procedures. Tom turned on the TV to a children's channel quietly, and Rachel ran to the kitchen to prepare something light. After chemotherapy, her son could only have simple home-cooked food. That night, the three of them ate macaroni and cheese, at Josh's request because he missed his mother's special macaroni. Outside, the quiet suburban neighborhood was growing dim. A neighbor's lawn mower hummed lazily in the distance. A car drove down the street with its headlights on. For a moment, everything seemed almost normal. "It's so nice to be at home." Josh sighed, looking up from his plate. He sat between his parents at the kitchen table. "I'm tired of the hospital, and I'm tired of your porridge," he added embarrassedly, looking at Rachel. Tom smiled briefly, the first time in a long time that he felt warmth from a family conversation. Rachel eagerly joined in the joke. "It's okay, I won't try to cook hospital porridge anymore, I promise. There's normal food waiting for us at home." Josh chuckled. Tom looked at his laughing son, at the smile on Rachel's face, sincere, gentle. My heart ached with conflicting feelings. The scene looked like they were back in their old lives. Almost. After dinner, Rachel began to wash the dishes, and Tom helped Josh upstairs. The boy's strength had not yet fully recovered, and he was quickly tired from prolonged activity. Josh went to his room, and Tom lingered in the corridor. He took bedding from the slightly open bedroom door. While still returning home, Tom firmly decided that he could not sleep with his wife in the same room. They didn't discuss it out loud, but Rachel understood and didn't mind. Only the pain flashed in her eyes when Tom made his bed on the pull-out couch downstairs at night. As Tom tucked Josh into bed, he tucked the blanket in and sat down next to him. "Dad," the boy called quietly, "will you always be home now? Well, don't go away for long anymore, okay?" There was a pleading look in his son's dark blue eyes. Tom's throat tightened. Traveling used to be part of the job, but now everything has changed. "I won't go anywhere, I promise," he answered quietly, ruffling his son's hair. "I'll be there." Josh smiled and closed his eyes. "You and Mom, are you nearby too? Because before Mom went somewhere." Tom froze. He realized that Josh was talking about those weeks apart when Rachel didn't live with them. The boy did not know the real reason, but of course, he noticed the absence of his mother. "Mom is here now too," Tom answered evasively. "We are both with you. Sleep well, son." He leaned over and kissed Josh's forehead. The boy was already falling asleep, tired of the events of the day. Tom tiptoed out of the nursery and bumped into Rachel in the hallway. She was standing with her hands clasped, as if afraid to break the silence. "Did you fall asleep?" she asked in a whisper. Tom nodded. "Thank you for putting him to bed," Rachel said just as quietly. "He's so happy today." "Yes," Tom agreed. "It's important to him now." They walked down together in the half-light. In the old days, Rachel would have taken Tom's arm or snuggled close to him, pleased with the day. Now there was an invisible gulf between them. On the ground floor, Tom hesitated, noticing a mountain of unwashed dishes on the kitchen table after cooking and dinner. "Go and rest, I'll go home," Rachel said, catching his gaze. Tom hesitated for a moment, but nodded. He had almost no strength left after an emotionally difficult day. "Thank you," he said quietly, feeling awkward about thanking his wife for something so trivial, as if she were a stranger. He went to his room, which was now his former office and his bedroom. Lying on the hard fold-out sofa, Tom couldn't fall asleep for a long time. The barely audible sound of water came from above. Rachel had finished washing the dishes and went to take a shower. Tom closed his eyes and tried not to think about anything, but memories flooded involuntarily. Exactly a year ago, at this same autumn time, he and Rachel put Josh to bed together after a walk in the park, then, laughing, washed the dishes together, pushing each other at the sink. Then he leaned over and kissed a drop of soap suds on her cheek, and they almost woke their son with their cheerful laughter and kisses in the kitchen. Tom opened his eyes, driving away the obsession. The past cannot be returned, and although today the family once again sat at the same table and shared the joy of Josh's return, the shadow of betrayal still lay between him and Rachel. He finally dozed off towards midnight, but the sleep was restless. Tom woke up in the middle of the night from a nightmare. He dreamed that he was climbing the stairs again and opening the bedroom door, and there was Rachel with the stranger. He sat up on the couch with a jerk, covered in cold sweat. His heart was pounding. Tom breathed deeply for a while, trying to come to his senses and figure out where he was. The quiet ticking of the clock told him that it was now about 3 in the morning. The house was dark and quiet. Suddenly, footsteps in the hallway light, timid. The door opened slightly, and Rachel stood on the threshold in a long t-shirt and soft slippers. In the light of the street lamp shining through the curtains, Tom made out her worried face. "Tom, you were screaming," she whispered. "Are you okay?" He ran his hand over his damp forehead. "Everything is fine," he responded hoarsely. "Just a bad dream." Rachel didn't move. Apparently, having woken up from his scream, she decided to go down. "Maybe I should bring some water?" she asked timidly. "No need. Go to sleep. Everything is fine," Tom answered tiredly. Rachel stood silently for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "I'm sorry you feel bad. If there's anything I can do to help." Tom felt a pang of irritation. Her concern was understandable, but he could not get used to the fact that their relationship was now reduced to strained politeness. He did not answer and lay back, turning his face to the back of the sofa. "Tom." Rachel's voice rustled at the door. He closed his eyes, hoping she would go away, and she did. A second later, he heard the door close softly and footsteps retreat down the hallway. Left alone in the dark, Tom suddenly felt moisture on his eyelashes. He quickly wiped away a lone tear. The wound in the soul turned out to be too deep to heal so quickly, even despite all the joint concerns about their son. At the end of November, they celebrated Thanksgiving. The neighbors invited the Harpers to their place and offered to bring food, but Rachel refused. She wanted to cook dinner for the family herself, albeit a modest one. The kitchen smelled of roasting turkey and pumpkin pie this morning. Tom helped with little things, fulfilling his wife's requests silently and with concentration. At the table, 3 Harpers, holding hands, thanked God for the main thing, that Josh was alive and on the mend. The boy prepared a short speech in advance, which he wrote with the help of the teacher. He thanked his mom and dad for being there and loving him. Rachel had tears in her eyes. Tom quietly hugged his son's shoulders. At these moments, all family problems seemed trivial in the face of such a miracle. Their child was with them, smiling and dreaming of the future. Later that evening, when Josh had finally fallen asleep, his breathing even and calm, the thin light of the nightlight casting soft shadows on the nursery walls, Rachel paused by the door. She stood for a moment, looking at her son, tucked under the blanket, almost transparent in his fragility, and then let out a soft breath. Her heart was clenched with worry and guilt, but there was a glimmer of hope today. They were together, the 3 of them, under one roof, almost like before. In the kitchen, she found a plate of pie she had baked between hospital and packing. Simple crust, some apples and cinnamon. Tom had once said that this pie reminded him of his childhood. She cut 2 slices, trying not to make any noise, and carefully, as if carrying something sacred, carried one into the living room. Tom sat in the semi-darkness, illuminated only by the light from his laptop screen. He was looking through his work emails, his brows drawn together, his gaze tense. His shirt was slightly unbuttoned, and his hand was fiddling with a cup of cold tea. Rachel almost didn't recognize Tom in this silent man. He had become too much of a stranger in the last few days. "Maybe you should take a break," she suggested timidly, coming closer. Her voice wavered. The pie was a great success. Tom looked up from the screen. For several seconds, he simply looked at her, as if deciding whether to accept this gesture. His face remained calm, but his eyes showed fatigue, deep and gray, like an autumn evening. Finally, he slowly took the plate. "Thank you," he said briefly, without smiling. Rachel sat at the other end of the couch, holding her plate as if it weren't food, but an attempt at dialogue. She took a careful bite of pie, her eyes never leaving her husband. Tom ate silently, intently, as if each bite required effort. "I'm so grateful we're together today," she said quietly. "Thank you for helping. And everything. It means a lot to Josh." Tom nodded without looking up. He seemed to hear, but did not want to answer. An awkward silence hung in the room. Only the ticking of the old clock on the wall disturbed it. Rachel twirled her fork in her fingers, steeling herself. Inside, she was shaking. She knew that if she said too much, he would leave. Too little, and he would remain somewhere far away, behind a wall, forever. "If you want," she finally exhaled, "we can watch a new movie on Netflix later, together." Tom took the last sip of tea, swallowed a piece of pie, shook his head without looking at her. "Sorry, Rachel. I'm really tired. I think I'll go to bed early. I have an important work call tomorrow." He stood up, almost silently. He placed the plate on the coffee table, carefully, without any sudden movements, and was already heading for the exit. Rachel spoke quickly, as if hoping to hold him for a moment longer. "Yes, of course. Sorry, I didn't want to distract you." He didn't answer. Didn't even look back. A minute later, the door to his office slammed downstairs dully, soundlessly, like the end of a conversation that never happened. Rachel was alone. The light in the living room seemed strange, lifeless. The pie on her plate remained untouched. She sighed and went into the kitchen, carrying both plates, as if resuming a failed reconciliation. She placed them in the sink, leaned against the edge of the table, and only then allowed herself to fall apart. Tears flowed, hot, full of powerlessness. Her shoulders trembled, her lips pursed to keep from crying out loud. She understood that Tom went not only to the office, he went deeper, deep into your resentment, pain, loss of trust. And all her guilt like a dull shadow stood between them, not allowing them to breathe. But despite this, she knew that she would not give up. While Josh sleeps upstairs, while there is still a shared house, while Tom still takes this pie, if not for her sake, but for the sake of the memories, she still has hope. It may be fragile, like a piece of ice in your palms, but real. Over the next few weeks, the Harper family lived a measured, almost normal life as much as possible when a child is going through difficult treatment. Josh spent most of his time at home, gathering strength before another round of chemotherapy. Tom took an extended leave of absence and worked remotely to be close. Rachel devoted herself entirely to caring for her son and running the household. In the mornings, they cooked Josh's breakfast together, oatmeal or pancakes, if the boy had an appetite. They were happy when he gained strength and asked to play. During the day, if Josh was feeling well, the three of them would go for short walks around the neighborhood. The quiet streets of their suburb seemed like another planet after the hustle and bustle of the hospital. Rachel restrained herself not to take Tom's arm during such walks, although from old memory the hand itself reached out to him. Tom walked next to him, holding his son's hand, and it was as if there was an invisible wall between him and his wife. Sometimes friends or neighbors came to check on Josh. In front of strangers, Tom and Rachel portrayed an ideal loving couple. They smiled and stayed close. Rachel caught herself feeling that at these moments her heart ached with hope. Isn't everything really getting better? Tom hugging her shoulders in front of the neighbors, is this really not just a game? But as soon as the guests left, Tom immediately pulled away, again plunging into himself or into the troubles around his son. In the evenings, the three of them watched movies or played board games. Josh was beaming with happiness. Both parents were nearby, and it seemed that it would always be like this. Rachel tried to extend these minutes as long as possible while putting her son to bed. She promised him that tomorrow would be a new good day. And then she went downstairs, where Tom was already locking himself in his office, avoiding personal conversations. In December, on the eve of Christmas, they finally had to talk frankly. By that time, Josh had already completed 2 blocks of chemotherapy and was again at home on a break before the next stage of treatment. The first snow fell in the city, and although the boy could not get too cold, he watched with delight as white flies circled outside the window. Rachel decorated the living room with garlands and put up a Christmas tree for the sake of her son to create a festive atmosphere during a difficult time. Before bed, she and Tom read Josh's favorite Christmas story about the Nutcracker together. The boy fell asleep peacefully under his mother's soft voice. Tom, sitting at the foot of the bed, stared at Rachel as she read, gently stroking her son's back. The picture was so touching that his throat tightened. When they left the room, Rachel smiled at him a little timidly, but joyfully. "He is so happy today. They gave so many gifts." She nodded toward the living room, where boxes from friends and neighbors who had decided to bring joy to a sick child were piled on the table. Tom also smiled with the corner of his lips. "Yes, he is really doing well today." Rachel went to the window and looked out into the snowy yard. A quiet Christmas melody played faintly below. "You know," she began quietly, "today is exactly 1 year since our whole family went to choose a Christmas tree at the farm. Remember when Josh insisted on taking the crooked one because she was sad that no one would buy it?" Tom remembered. He could picture that day clearly. The crisp air, his son's laughter as they dragged the stunted tree to the car, and then the whole family decorated it with everything they could find. It looked ridiculous, but Josh loved it. "Yes, of course I remember," Tom said, coming closer. A warm note crept into his voice. "Back then, needles were falling every day, and I was always vacuuming." Rachel smiled, looking down. "You grumbled, but I still persuaded you to take that Christmas tree," she said quietly. "You were always kind, even if you didn't want to show it." Tom remained silent, not knowing what to answer. "My heart ached from the flood of memories." Rachel turned to him. The moonlight picked out a tired and sad, but beautiful face from the semi-darkness. "Tom," she breathed, "I know I shouldn't, but I want to thank you for letting me come home, for letting us be together now for Josh. I know how much pain I've caused you. Every day I pray to God that you can forgive me. Someday." Her voice wavered. Rachel bit her lip, holding back tears. She waited for the answer with bated breath. Tom looked away. He felt a familiar mixture of anger and longing. The anger had dulled lately, as concerns for his son pushed it into the background. But when Rachel spoke of forgiveness, the old wounds began to ache again. "Let's not now," he said quietly, trying to keep his voice even. "I don't want to discuss this. Not today." Rachel nodded, tears glistening on her eyelashes. "Of course, I'm sorry," she whispered. They stood there in silence for a few seconds. You could hear the clock ticking and the lights on the Christmas tree crackling. "I appreciate everything you do for Josh," Tom added suddenly, breaking the silence. "And I see how hard it is for you. But I just don't know if I can ever forget what happened." The last words were difficult for him. Rachel covered her face with her hands, unable to contain her quiet sobs. "I understand," she said, controlling her voice. "But I won't stop trying to earn your trust back, even if it takes your whole life." Tom sighed heavily. There was nothing to answer. The gap between them still yawned, despite all the outward well-being. "We should go to bed," he finally said quietly. "Tomorrow is a hard day." Rachel wiped her eyes. "Yes, of course," she whispered. Before they went to their rooms, they looked in on Josh one more time. The boy was sleeping peacefully, hugging his stuffed astronaut. The sight of his calm face reminded Tom and Rachel what they were working for. They exchanged a quick glance, no hostility, but none of the old intimacy, and went their separate ways in silence. Christmas night in the Harper house was quiet and bright, but underneath the external idol, there was a tension that did not disappear. Spring brought new hopes. Josh felt much better. The intensive therapy course was over. Doctors were talking about stable remission. He still needed periodic procedures and medications, but the boy could spend most of his time at home, gradually returning to normal life. His hair thinned after the chemo, but Josh hardly paid attention to it. He proudly wore a cap with the NASA emblem, donated by volunteers at the hospital, and dreamed of returning to school with his friends as soon as possible. Rachel and Tom relaxed a little too. The worst months were behind them, and now, watching their son kick a ball around the yard or enthusiastically building a new Lego set at the kitchen table, they almost believed that everything would be okay. Life was getting better, at least on the surface. One day in early April, Rachel was returning from the hospital after another routine checkup when she stopped at the supermarket. She needed to buy food for dinner and pick up a special formula for Josh that she had ordered in advance. Tom and his son stayed home. Josh was tired after the hospital, and Tom put him to rest. Rachel walked the aisles of the supermarket as usual, picking up the necessary items: vegetables, lactose-free milk for Josh, fresh bread. In her head, she was already planning the menu for the coming week. Their life had entered a new rut. Caring for their son filled every hour, but Rachel did not complain. On the contrary, she was grateful for the chance to be close to her family and correct past mistakes. At the checkout, having put her purchases out, she patiently waited for her turn. Ahead of her, a woman was looking for a discount coupon for a long time, and Rachel, smiling, thought that before she would have been irritated. But now little things did not bother her after all. The main thing was that Josh was alive and on the mend. Rachel. Suddenly, an uncertain male voice came from behind. Rachel winced and turned around. Behind him, holding a bag of oranges, stood Adam Blake. He looked almost the same as he did in the fall. A sports jacket, jeans, and a mixture of awkwardness and joy from meeting him on his face. "Hello," Adam said quietly, lowering the package onto the conveyor belt. "Good to see you. How are you?" Rachel felt cold. Her heart jumped into her throat. This was the last thing she needed. But there was nothing she could do. He had already seen her. "Hello, Adam," she replied evenly, trying to remain calm. "I'm fine." He gave her a careful look. "I heard about Josh," Adam said uncertainly. "Friends from the sports club told me that your son is sick. How is he now?" Rachel looked down at the checkout line, where her groceries were slowly moving. Of course, news traveled fast in their town. She sighed heavily. "He's better. The disease has receded. The doctors are talking about remission." "This is wonderful," Adam responded sincerely. "I'm very happy for him." Rachel nodded silently. There was an awkward pause. Adam shifted from foot to foot, searching for words. "Listen, Rachel," he lowered his voice. "I thought a lot. I know you said then that everything was over between us, but I would like to see you. Not like before, just talk. I was worried about you." Rachel shook her head, looking him straight in the eye. "Adam, don't. This is of no use. I have a completely different life now. I'm with my family, you know." "I understand," he said quickly, leaning forward. "I just miss you. We are not enemies. I was worried." "It's not worth it," Rachel snapped softly but firmly. "I'm fine. Is it true?" The cashier distracted them by naming the amount. Rachel held out her card, feeling Adam's gaze on her. As she took the receipt and began to put her groceries in her bag, Adam spoke again. "I'm sorry about how it all turned out. I didn't want to destroy your family. I understand you won't come back to me. But if you suddenly need a friend, support." Rachel zipped up her bag and grabbed the handles of the cart. "Thank you," she said quietly, avoiding his gaze. "But I don't need anything. Take care of yourself, Adam." She turned the cart around and walked away, her heart pounding with tension. She wanted to leave, to end this conversation. Adam looked upset, but he didn't follow. Rachel almost ran into Tom as she left the supermarket. He stood at the soda fountain, holding 2 bottles of cola, their favorite soda that they indulged in sometimes on Fridays. Seeing his wife, Tom raised his eyebrows. "Have you finished yet? I thought you might need some help with the bags." He began calmly. Rachel froze, feeling the blood drain from her face. How much did he see? Had he been standing there the entire time she was talking to Adam? Or just arrived? Everything inside me tightened. "Thank you, I just paid," she squeezed out, trying to smile. "How's Josh? Why aren't you with him?" "He's asleep," Tom replied, looking at her closely. "I thought I'd catch you in time." There was a tense silence. Rachel lowered her eyes, realizing that she could not stand her husband's heavy gaze. "Did you meet someone you know?" Tom suddenly asked coldly. Rachel winced. Of course, he had seen everything. There was no point in lying. "Adam was here," she admitted barely audibly. "I bumped into him by chance at the checkout." Tom nodded silently. His face was unreadable. "I didn't say anything." Rachel began, but stopped short when she saw the muscle on his cheekbone twitch. "I see," Tom snapped. "Let me take the bags to the car." He took the grocery bag from her and strode toward the exit. Rachel hurried after him, feeling the cold sweat running down her back. They drove home in silence. Tom looked straight ahead. His fingers clenched the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Rachel was afraid to say a word next to her. In the back seat, Josh was snoring peacefully. Tom took him for a ride so that the boy would fall asleep faster. It wasn't until they'd pulled the car into the garage and put their son to bed that Tom spoke. Rachel was putting the milk in the fridge when he appeared in the kitchen. "So you continue to see him," he said quietly, but this made it even worse. Rachel spun around, closing the refrigerator door. "No, it was an accident. I didn't know he would be there," she said quickly. "Of course it was an accident," Tom chuckled mirthlessly. "Like everyone else. Happened by chance, right?" Rachel felt desperate. She saw what Tom was getting at and understood. Everything she was so afraid of was beginning to come true. "Tom, listen." She stepped closer, but he raised his hand, stopping her. "I saw you talking to him," he said harshly. "I saw everything, Rachel." "I have nothing to hide," she pleaded. "He came up and asked about Josh. I said we didn't need anything and left." Tom looked at her, narrowing his eyes. "You could have not talked to him at all," he said. "Turn around and leave." I... Rachel trailed off. Indeed, she could have tried to leave immediately, but she was taken aback by surprise. And Adam didn't do anything wrong, he just spoke. He asked about his son, she added quietly, looking down. "I'm not rude, I couldn't ignore." "I couldn't ignore," Tom repeated with venom. "Poor Adam, he's worried. We need to console him." Rachel flushed. "It's not fair. I rejected him, you know. I didn't promise him anything." "Oh, didn't you promise anything?" Tom raised his voice, but immediately pulled himself together, glancing at the ceiling where Josh was sleeping on the second floor. He clenched his jaw, trying not to scream. "How convenient. So we can leave an escape route, right?" "What ways?" Rachel felt her eyes fill with tears. "Tom, stop. I don't have anything with him, do I?" "I don't care anymore, Rachel," Tom said suddenly, tiredly, turning away. "Honestly, you do what you know. I haven't controlled you for a long time." The words hit him harder than a slap. Rachel moved closer, trying to look into his face. "Don't say that. You care, otherwise we wouldn't be living under the same roof now," she whispered. Tom smiled bitterly. "Don't flatter yourself. We live under the same roof just for Josh. And I thought..." Rachel choked on the onset of crying. "It seemed to me that we were becoming a family again. At least a little." Tom turned around sharply and looked her straight in the eyes. Pain and anger splashed in his gaze. "Family? After everything? Rachel, don't kid yourself. I haven't forgotten for a day what you did." There was a heavy silence. Rachel stood silently in the middle of the kitchen, bathed in the warm light of the lamp, tears streaming down her cheeks. Tom turned away and rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly. "Let's finish this conversation," he said quietly. "All this is useless." He walked out, leaving her alone. That night, Rachel didn't sleep for a long time, sitting in the living room with the lights off. Her heart was breaking with pain. She felt her hope crumbling. Just yesterday, it seemed to her that the ice was gradually melting, that Tom had softened. But now she again stood on the edge of the abyss. May was tense. After the scene in the supermarket, Tom completely withdrew into himself. Rachel, feeling his coldness, tried not to run into him. They talked only about necessary things, about Josh's health, about the upcoming trip, about what medicines to take with them. Josh, unaware of the recent quarrel, lived in happy anticipation of the trip. The parents had no choice but to put on the masks of the world again. They no longer mentioned Adam. They had tacitly agreed to hush up this episode. Each of them, in their own way, was waiting for June. For Josh, the trip promised to be a dream come true, and for Tom and Rachel, a respite, a chance to drive away, at least for a while, the heavy thoughts that had thickened over the family. And so, in early June, when the warm sun was already a reminder of the approach of summer, the Harper family set off on their first real trip in a long time. The charity, having learned about Josh's recovery, invited them and other children who had overcome cancer on a trip to California, visiting Disneyland and the ocean coast. Josh has been living this dream ever since and can hardly wait. Every day he asks how long it is left until summer. For him, this trip became a symbol of recovery and a reward for all the torment of treatment. The plane, the hotel near Anaheim, the noisy, colorful amusement park, all this at first stunned Josh, but soon he literally blossomed. They spent 3 days at Disneyland, as if in a fairy tale. Josh managed to try all the coolest rides, from the fast-paced wretches in space, where he squealed with delight, rushing in the darkness among the stars, to the mysterious pirate ship of the Caribbean, where they followed the adventures of the pirates with bated breath. They took pictures with Mickey Mouse and other characters, bought souvenirs and huge balloons. By evening, tired but happy, they watched the magnificent parade and fireworks, laughed together loudly and sincerely as they had not laughed for a long time. Rachel couldn't stop looking at her son's sparkling eyes. He looked almost healthy, a little thinner, with short hair, but happy and full of energy. Looking at him, she herself became infected with joy. And Tom seemed to melt his soul when he saw Josh laugh. These days, amid the fun of the park, they hardly thought about illness or the past, only about how to make their son feel good. On the 4th day of the trip, the Harpers moved to the coast to a small resort town where they were to spend another week relaxing by the ocean. The charitable foundation rented a cozy house for each family right next to the beach. In the morning, Josh saw the Pacific Ocean for the first time, endless turquoise waters, and the surf running with a soft hiss onto the golden sand. The boy was delighted. He immediately began collecting shells and building a sand castle. Tom helped him dig ditches. Rachel decorated the turrets with shells Josh found. That evening, the three of them sat on the porch of the cabin, wrapped in blankets, and watched the huge crimson disk of the sun slowly sink into the ocean. Josh, who had run around all day, dozed off, settling down on Rachel's lap. Tom brought a blanket and carefully wrapped his son. For a few moments, Tom and Rachel sat very close, shoulder to shoulder, trying not to move so as not to wake the child, and admired the sunset. The golden glow fell on their faces. "Thank you," Rachel suddenly said quietly, looking at the golden path on the water. "For what?" Tom responded just as quietly. "For being with us. For trying for him," she answered, and after a short pause added, "and for these last few days. They're wonderful." Tom looked down at his sleeping son. "He deserves it," he said softly. "After everything he's been through, he deserves some happy moments." "Yes," Rachel whispered, holding Josh tighter. "He needed this. We all needed this." Tom said nothing, but Rachel felt him lean his head slightly towards hers, barely touching her hair with his hair. This fleeting touch made her heart skip a beat. She turned her face to him so close that she saw the golden glow of sunset in the depths of his brown eyes. They looked at each other for several endless seconds. Rachel felt hope flare up inside her. Maybe now he. Tom slowly pulled away and stood up. "I'll go take him to bed," he said quietly, carefully taking the sleeping Josh from her arms. Rachel nodded, hiding her disappointment. She watched Tom carry their son into the house. Her heart was breaking with love for her son, for her husband, and with fear. But that fear had almost receded in the last few days. Tom was attentive to her, almost like before. They laughed together, chatted about trivial things, remembered funny stories with Josh. He seemed to her again like the same man she had once married. And although there were no kisses between them, no talk of love, Rachel believed that he was moving toward reconciliation. Maybe not right away, but he was moving. After all, he was looking at her almost the same way again. She noticed it in the furtive glances he threw her, in the warm intonation when he asked her if she was tired. That night by the ocean, Rachel fell asleep smiling. She dreamed that their family was happy and whole, that there were many years of joy ahead, like in the good old TV series with a good ending. She dreamed that Tom forgave her. Summer flew by quickly, and golden autumn once again knocked on the windows of the Harper house. Fate was cruel. 2 months after the happy journey, in the midst of velvet September, the disease returned. At first, there were vague, alarming signs. Josh began to tire quickly. One morning, he had a slight fever. Tom and Rachel became worried and took their son for an unscheduled examination. The tests showed poor results. The leukocytes were off the charts again. Relapse. Rachel didn't want to believe it. She cried in Dr. Richard's office, begging him to check everything again. After all, Josh felt so good, ran, played. The doctor shook his head gloomily. Unfortunately, the leukemia had returned, and in an even more aggressive form. The second struggle began much more difficult, exhausting, desperate. If the first time everything happened as if in a dream, with faith, hope, and an almost childish conviction that we will succeed, then now reality was naked and merciless. Josh was back in the hospital, and this time he didn't smile as much. He was older, smarter, and tired. It was increasingly difficult for him to understand why he had to endure the IVs, the shots, the nausea, the sleepless nights again. He had beaten cancer, hadn't he? He had been a hero, as his dad said. Why had it all come back? "Mom," he asked in a whisper, looking at the ceiling in the semi-darkness of the room, "is this because I behaved badly? Is this a punishment?" Rachel's heart sank every time, as if something invisible was squeezing her from the inside. She stroked his cold hand and shook her head. "No, honey, no way. You're the bravest, kindest boy in the world. It's not your fault. It's just, the disease is so stubborn, but we'll catch up with it again, do you hear? Together." She spoke quietly, like a spell, and then she went into the corridor, leaned against the wall, and covered her mouth with her hand so that no one could hear her sobs. Tom was more reserved. He would sit by the bed with a book or a tablet, read to his son, show him photos of Josh's friends from school, tell him that the Lego set was still at home, waiting for Josh to come home. He even pretended that nothing had changed. "Well, Captain," he said cheerfully, "do you think this chemistry is the final blow to the enemy?" Josh nodded weakly, smiling slightly. He was holding on with all his might. He wanted to be brave for his mom, for his dad. He still dreamed of going back to school, of flying a kite with his friend Mark, of growing up to be a doctor so he could heal other kids. But every day took its toll on him. After the third day of the new course of chemotherapy, he almost stopped speaking. Only short answers. His head was shaved. Sparse fluff was barely visible on the skin, and huge, shiny eyes seemed disproportionately large on his pale, thin face. Rachel looked at him and couldn't hold back her tears. "Where's my Josh?" she thought. "Where is that boy who ran around the yard shouting that he is a superhero? Where is his voice, his laughter, his smell after a walk? What is this hospital doing to him?" One night, when the room was quiet and the lights were dimming almost to darkness, Josh suddenly whispered, "Dad, I don't want it anymore." Tom looked up from his book. "What, baby? I don't want any more chemistry. I'm tired. Is it possible not to be treated?" The words seemed to hit him physically. He put the book down, leaned closer, and took his son's hand. Josh, I know how hard it is for you, but we can't give up. We fight like superheroes, remember? Josh turned away. I'm scared. He breathed out. I don't want to die. Rachel came over from the other side of the bed, sat down, and, not holding back her tears, kissed her son on the temple. And you won't die, Joshik. Dad and I are here. We are with you until the end. We will do everything so that you live. Do you hear? He nodded, barely noticeable, on the edge of sleep and reality. Tom looked at Rachel. Their eyes met, and there was fear in them, and despair, but also something else. An invisible thread that connected them again, for the first time in a long time. Not as husband and wife, as parents united by a single goal, to preserve life, to save what was left of their world. Tom seemed to have stopped sleeping altogether. His face was drawn, his eyes were red from lack of sleep, and the stubble on his cheeks was permanent. He no longer thought about such things as a razor or a change of clothes. He spent days and nights at his son's bedside, barely taking his eyes off Josh, as if he were afraid that if he looked away for even a moment, something irreversible would happen. Sometimes Rachel begged him, Tom, please, 5 minutes. Go out and have some coffee. You need yourself as much as Josh does. He nodded, agreed, slowly stood up, and returned back a few minutes later. A walk around the hospital yard or a plastic cup of cold coffee seemed pointless to him when his son lay behind the glass door, so small, so fragile, with transparent skin and tubes in his nose. What if I leave even for a moment and he suddenly calls and I'm not there? This thought did not leave him. At night, when the ward was plunged into twilight, Tom sat next to Josh, held his hand and whispered. Not quite words, not quite prayers. He had never been religious, even as a child, but now he prayed. Not loudly, not pretentiously, but quietly, almost silently. Please, please take whatever you want. My life, my soul, everything. Just leave him. He spoke to God, the universe, fate, anyone who could hear. It didn't matter anymore. He needed to turn to something because he no longer had the strength to scream inside. Josh turned 11 in the fall, the birthday they weren't sure they'd get. The party was held right in the ward. Volunteers from the Children's Fund came with colorful balloons, hung them on the Roman 4, on the closet, on the door handle. One of the nurses brought a small cake the doctor allowed literally one tiny piece. Rachel decorated the nightstand in advance with drawings and paper stars that she and Josh made together during their last hospitalization. It was almost a party, almost a normal day, but only almost. Josh lay in bed, wearing a soft space print t-shirt. His smile was weak but real. His eyes were a little cloudy but full of light. And this, Tom said with a smile, handing over the box, is our main gift. He pulled out a toy spacesuit white with NASA patches, a helmet with a golden visor, just like the ones real astronauts wear, only tiny, just the right size for Josh. This, Josh whispered, carefully touching the fabric, just like those who flew to Mars. Exactly, Rachel replied, sitting down next to him. When you get better, you will wear it, and you will fly as you dreamed of. Josh laughed softly. His laughter was thin, like a breath of wind. I definitely will. Just let the cancer go away, then straight into the spacesuit, and forward into space. Rachel smiled, trying her best not to let her lips tremble. Then she excused herself, saying she was going to get some water. She went out into the hallway, and before she reached the cooler, she sank down on a bench and covered her face with her hands. The tears flowed without stopping, quietly but desperately. From pain, from love, from helplessness. He still believes, he still dreams, and I. She couldn't say it out loud, not even to herself. But the fear that this was his son's last birthday squeezed his chest to the point of nausea. In the hospital room, Tom lifted his head and looked at Josh. He had dozed off again, hugging the edge of his suit. Tom placed his hand on Josh's forehead and smiled for the first time all day, faintly but sincerely. Because despite everything, their son was happy at that moment, and that was worth holding on for. Just a little longer. One more day. One more night. But neither prayers nor the doctor's efforts helped. The disease was stronger, more insidious, more cruel than anyone could have imagined. A month after Josh's birthday, when the balloons had already deflated and the spacesuit lay folded in the corner of the room, the doctors, tired, sympathetic, but hopelessly blunt, said what Tom and Rachel feared to hear most. Standard therapy is no longer effective. We have exhausted all protocols. The room began to spin. The world seemed to stop for a moment, falling into a silent pit. Tom looked at the doctor, but as if he did not hear the words, only a dull echo, a pulse in his ears, and a ringing sound, similar to a scream that did not escape. "There is one option," the doctor added after a pause. "Experimental treatment at a clinic in Houston. Very aggressive, very risky, but—" "We're going," Tom interrupted, not allowing him to finish. "We're leaving immediately." He spoke sharply, chokedly, as if through concrete. There was no doubt in his eyes. He would lead his son even through the desert, across the ocean, through hell if it gave even a tiny chance. Rachel, standing with her hands clasped, nodded in silence. Everything inside was screaming, everything was rushing out fear, pain, panic, but she held on. She clung to this spark, to this thin bridge of hope that still remained between them and the darkness. If only he lived. Let it be hard, let it hurt, let us fall apart along the way as long as he lives. Josh was too weak. He smiled before the flight, even tried to joke when Tom picked him up. "And when will we land on the rocket?" They smiled without answering. There was nothing to say. On the way to the clinic, Josh's condition worsened dramatically. He began to choke while still in the air. His forehead was covered in sweat. His body seemed to be on fire from the inside. His temperature jumped to 40. His lips were dry. His eyes were cloudy. Tom held his hand the entire flight, wiping away the sweat and whispering, "Hold on, baby, hold on. We're almost there. They'll help you there. Just don't fall asleep. Do you hear? Please, don't fall asleep." At the clinic in Houston, the boy was immediately taken to intensive care. Tom and Rachel were left outside the door, as if thrown out of their own world. The corridor was white, faceless, without sound. Only the monotonous hum of the ventilation and the dull pounding of the heart in their ears. They could not sit up, could not talk. Rachel stood with her forehead pressed against the wall and whispered to herself, like a mantra, "Not now. Not like that. Please, God, let him bear it." Tom walked back and forth like a hunted animal, his fingers clenched into fists until they were white. He did not feel tired, did not notice how his legs hurt, how his chest ached. He only saw the door, and he prayed without words, just a thought, just a desire, so strong that it seemed that he could force Josh's heart to beat by force of will. "You fought, son. You didn't give up. Don't give up now. I'm here. I'm with you." The hours ticked by agonizingly slowly. Night was falling outside the window. People passed by in the corridor, nurses, doctors, some parents, but Tom and Rachel seemed to be in a bubble, in a glass cage of despair. In that white space, all that existed was their love for Josh and the fear that she could no longer save him. Finally, they were allowed in, with only the hope of saying goodbye. Josh lay under the transparent dome of an oxygen mask, motionless. Only his eyes shone from under half-closed lids. The monitors beeped rhythmically, counting the beats of his weakening heart. Tom and Rachel sat on either side of the bed, holding their son's hands. Rachel stroked his thin hand, covered in traces of countless injections, and could not hold back her sobs. "Mom," Josh called out, barely audible. She leaned lower, trying to smile through her tears. "I'm here, darling, I'm here." "Dad," the boy croaked. "I'm here too, son," Tom responded, covering his son's hand with his palm. Josh looked from one parent to the other with difficulty. There was anxiety in his dull eyes. "Don't quarrel, please," he said in a weak voice. Promise. Rachel nodded, kissing his hand. We promise, darling. We won't, do you hear? We're all good. Tom bit his lip until it bled so as not to burst into tears. I promise, son, he said hoarsely. You have a wonderful mother. We won't argue any more. The main thing is, don't be afraid. You'll feel better soon. Josh smiled slightly at the corners of his lips and closed his eyes. He didn't say another word. A few hours later, he was gone. Josh's small, tortured heart, the heart that had clung so desperately to life, that had beaten in spite of the pain and the tubes and the chemo, stopped beating. The room was frozen and inhumanly silent, broken only by the sharp, piercing beep of the monitor, announcing that life was gone, forever. The doctor turned off the sound of the device, said something to the nurses dryly, businesslike, almost in a whisper. But Tom no longer heard. He stood, then fell to his knees, as if the threads holding him upright had snapped in an instant. He screamed. It wasn't just a scream, it was something primal, a wild sob torn from the very soul. A scream that combined all the sleepless nights, all the hopes, all the despair that had been squeezed in her chest for months. Rachel, standing next to the bed, froze for a second. She had never heard such a sound, not in the movies, not in life. It was the scream of an animal whose heart had been torn out. The scream of a father who had lost the only thing that kept him breathing. Tom collapsed on the floor by the bed, clasping his head in his hands, scratching his face with his nails, feeling no pain. His fingers left thin, bloody streaks, and his lips incoherently whispered his son's name over and over again. Josh. Josh. God, no, no. Rachel rushed to the body, pressing the cold, lifeless body to her chest, as if she could warm it, bring back its breath. Her hands trembled, her lips kissed the boy's forehead, already cold, alien, like a porcelain doll's. She stroked the hair, of which there was almost none left, whispered, Son, my dear, wake up, please. Mommy is here. Come on. I won't let go. I won't let you go. But Josh couldn't hear any more. His face was calm, almost peaceful. It was as if everything he had been through was now behind him. The nurses approached with compassion and care. One knelt down next to Rachel, gently taking her shoulder. We will give you time, but you need peace. Rachel didn't listen. She held on tighter until she was sedated. Tears flowed even as her eyes closed from the effects of the drug. Her heart was breaking in the silence that nothing could drown out. As the nurses gently led Rachel out of the room, she was still reaching behind her with her hands, sobbing as if she was being torn from her very body. Tom stayed. He sat by the bed, pressed against the edge, his face hidden by his hands, covered with scratches and blood from how he, without noticing, bit his fists so as not to scream again. His swing was mechanical, as if his body didn't know what to do without a soul. My boy, he whispered, forgive me, I didn't save you. He said this without knowing to whom, to himself, to God, to the universe, to Josh. The room resembled a battlefield after a fight, sterile and silent, but saturated with screams, tears, and something invisible that remained love, loss, unbearable silence. Josh's funeral took place on a cold, rainy day. It was as if nature itself was crying along with those gathered. Before the coffin was closed, Rachel, with trembling hands, placed a plush astronaut inside her son's favorite toy. Let it be with Josh on his last journey. The small coffin, white as school chalk, was lowered into the damp earth to the mournful sounds of a violin. Dozens of people came to say goodbye to Josh. Teachers from his school, parents of classmates, neighbors on the street. They all sincerely cried, remembering the courage and kindness of the boy whose short life was cut short so unfairly. Tom and Rachel stood, hugging each other, under one umbrella. Rachel did not let go of her hands, afraid of falling. Her legs did not obey her. Tom supported her, pressing her tightly to himself. His face was stony. During the entire ceremony, he did not utter a sound, only his lips turned white from the way he clenched his jaw. After the funeral, relatives and friends who attended the ceremony gradually left. Tom and Rachel were left alone near a small fresh hill covered with white lilies, Josh's favorite flowers. When the last acquaintance quietly closed the cemetery gates behind him, Tom carefully pushed Rachel away. "We have to go," he said dully. Rachel seemed to wake up from a dream. She sobbed and looked around. There was no one around, only wet marble slabs and rows of crosses. "I don't want to leave," she whispered, looking at the grave. "He's there alone. He's scared." The voice broke. Tom shook his head, trying not to burst into tears again. He pulled the hood of her jacket over her head, protecting her from the drizzling rain. "He's not scared," he said, barely audible. "Nothing hurts him anymore." Rachel buried her face in his shoulder, and he let her cry a little longer, listening to the sound of the rain. Finally, she pulled away a little herself. They walked slowly toward the cemetery exit. Rachel held on to Tom's arm, or she would have fallen. When they reached the car, Tom sat her down in the passenger seat and walked around to the driver's seat. But he was in no hurry to start the engine. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the raindrops pattering on the roof of the car. "I'll take you home," Tom broke the silence. "And then I'll go on. I need to leave for a while." Rachel turned her tear-stained face towards him. "Where?" a whisper escaped her. Tom couldn't meet her gaze. He stared at the sheets of rain outside the windshield. "I don't know," he answered honestly after a pause. "Away from here. I have already written a letter of resignation, selling the house." "Tom." Rachel caught her breath. "But why? We need each other now more than ever." Her voice trembled. Tom was silent. Then Rachel broke into a cry, hoarse with tears. "Why? Tell me the truth right now." Tom continued to look ahead, at the rain-gray cemetery beyond the fence. "I can't, Rachel," he said quietly. "I can't stay. Every corner here reminds of him, and of your betrayal. I have nothing left inside me anymore. Nothing." Rachel cringed as if struck. She covered her face with her hands. "I know," she moaned. "It's all my fault. This is my punishment. But, Tom, please, don't leave me alone. I can't. Without you, without him." She burst into tears. Tom gripped the steering wheel, holding back his tears. He was so tired. Tired of pain, of loss, of struggle. "I'm sorry," he said almost in a whisper, "but it's better this way." Rachel couldn't find any more words. She turned to the window, trembling all over. Tom started the engine and drove off. They reached the city without exchanging a single word. Rachel looked out at the rain-washed streets, praying that this trip would not end, because then everything would end. But here was a familiar street, a home. Tom stopped the car at the gate. The rain had almost stopped, only rare drops were flowing from the trees. Rachel didn't move while Tom came out and took her bag from the trunk. Finally, he opened the passenger door. She looked up at him with reddened eyes. "I'll accompany you," he just said, gesturing for her to leave. They walked to the porch together, slowly, as if each step was difficult. The ringing silence of an autumn evening hung around them. Rachel felt her keys in her coat pocket. The door opened and the musty air of an empty house smelled. Tom put his bag down in the hallway. He paused for a moment, then said quietly, "Goodbye, Rachel." She shuddered at these words. My chest felt cold. "Goodbye," she echoed, barely audible. Tom stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in. His gaze slid over the family photos on the wall, the three of them smiling at the beach last summer, Josh in his baseball uniform. Tom clenched his jaw. Without another word, he turned and walked out into the twilight. The door closed quietly. Rachel rushed to the window just in time to see Tom getting into the car. The engine rumbled, the headlights cut through the gathering dusk. The car slowly drove away from the empty house. Rachel stood at the dark window, pressing her palms to the glass. There, outside, the last rays of light of her life were disappearing. This house was now empty, no laughter, no footsteps, only silence and shadows of the past. She sank to the floor right next to the window and burst into tears loudly, bitterly, like she had never cried before. But no one could hear her anymore. Outside, a fine rain began to fall again from the gray sky, rustling through the fallen leaves. It washed away the tracks on the road. Tom's car disappeared, dissolving into the damp autumn gloom. He was leaving forever, taking with him the fragments of her broken heart. The story has come to an end, but this is just the beginning. There are even more unexpected turns and exciting events ahead. Subscribe so you don't miss what others are only guessing about. Like and comment are your connection with the author. See you soon. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.